I was 13 when my family moved into an old house on the outskirts of a small town. The house was big, with lots of character. Wooden floors, high ceilings, and large windows that let in plenty of light during the day. But at night, the house felt different, almost alive. From the first week, strange things started happening. It was little stuff at first. Doors opening on their own, lights flickering, and cold drafts that seemed to come from nowhere. My parents said it was just the house settling, but I wasn't so sure. One night I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep when I heard it, a faint humming sound. It was soft and melodic, almost like a lullaby, and it seemed to be coming from the hallway outside my room. I got up and opened my door, expecting to find my mom or dad, but the hallway was empty. The humming stopped as soon as I stepped into the hall. Feeling a little spooked, I went back to bed and pulled the covers over my head. The next day, I asked my mom if she had been humming outside my room, but she said she hadn't. My dad laughed and told me I must have been dreaming. Over the next few weeks, the humming continued. It always happened late at night, and it always stopped the moment I tried to find the source. One night, I decided to stay awake and wait for it. Around midnight, the humming started again. This time, I stayed in bed listening carefully. It grew louder, and I realized it wasn't coming from the hallway. It was coming from the attic. The attic door was in the hallway just a few steps from my room. I had always felt uneasy around it, and now I knew why. Summoning my courage, I grabbed a flashlight and crept into the hallway. I stared at the attic door, my heart pounding. Slowly, I reached up and pulled the cord to lower the ladder. As the ladder unfolded, the humming grew louder. I climbed up a few steps and shone my flashlight into the attic. The beam illuminated dusty boxes and cobwebs, but nothing else. The humming stopped abruptly, leaving the attic eerily silent. Just as I was about to climb back down, I saw it. A small, old music box sitting on one of the boxes. It was open, its tiny ballerina figure frozen mid-spin. I didn't touch it. I climbed down as fast as I could and shut the attic door, vowing never to go up there again. The humming stopped after that night, but I always felt like something was watching me, especially when I was alone. A few years later, when we moved out of the house, I asked my mom if she had ever noticed anything strange. She hesitated before saying, "I didn't want to scare you, but yes, I heard the humming too." To this day, I wonder what was in that attic and what it wanted. When I was in college, I rented a small one-bedroom apartment near campus. It wasn't much, but it was affordable, and I liked having a space to myself. The building was old and creaky, with long, dimly lit hallways that always felt a bit eerie at night. One evening, I came home late after studying at the library. It was almost midnight, and the building was unusually quiet. As I unlocked my door and stepped inside, I noticed a strange smell, like damp earth and something metallic. I shrugged it off, assuming it was coming from the plumbing or maybe the hallway. I tossed my backpack onto the couch and went to the kitchen to grab a snack before bed. As I opened the fridge, I thought I heard a faint sound, almost like whispering coming from the living room. I stopped and listened, but the sound was gone. Thinking I was just tired and imagining things, I brushed it off and went to bed. Around 3 a.m., I woke up suddenly. My room was freezing, even though I had turned the heater on before going to sleep. I could hear a faint tapping sound, like someone was lightly knocking on the wall near my bed. I sat up, my heart pounding, and turned on the lamp. The sound stopped immediately. The room was still and silent. I convinced myself it was just the old building settling and tried to go back to sleep. But as I lay there, I heard the sound again, this time coming from the living room. It wasn't tapping anymore. It was a faint, rhythmic scratching. Gathering my courage, I got out of bed and crept toward the living room. I turned on the light, expecting to see something or someone, but the room was empty. The scratching sound had stopped. I double-checked that all the windows and doors were locked before going back to bed, but I barely slept the rest of the night. The next day, I told my neighbor about what had happened. She gave me a strange look and said, "You're in 3B, right?" The last guy who lived there said he heard weird noises too. I asked her what happened to him, and she hesitated before saying, "He moved out pretty quickly, said he couldn't sleep there anymore." I laughed nervously and tried to play it off, but her words stuck with me. That night, the tapping started again, but this time it was louder and more insistent. It seemed to follow me, starting in one part of the apartment and moving closer. I finally worked up the nerve to shout, "Who's there?" The tapping stopped, but I swear I heard a faint chuckle, low and guttural. before everything went silent. The next morning, I packed a bag and stayed with a friend for a few days. I never experienced anything like that in the apartment again, but I moved out as soon as my lease was up. To this day, I still wonder if the strange noises were just the building's quirks, or if something else was trying to get my attention. When I was 19, I took a summer job as a groundskeeper for a historic mansion-turned-museum. The property was huge, with sprawling gardens, a pond, and an old caretaker's house that had been abandoned for decades. My job was to maintain the gardens, clear debris, and make sure the paths were safe for visitors. I loved working outdoors, but the caretaker's house always gave me the creeps. It sat at the edge of the property, its windows boarded up and its roof sagging. One afternoon, I was trimming hedges near the caretaker's house when I noticed the front door was slightly ajar. That was strange. It had always been locked when I walked by before. Curious, I decided to take a closer look. The air around the house felt heavy, and the closer I got, the stronger the feeling of being watched. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, shining my flashlight around the dusty interior. The house was small, with a single room on the first floor and a staircase leading to a loft above. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and cobwebs hung from the ceiling. As I moved further in, I noticed strange markings scratched into the walls, symbols I didn't recognize. They were everywhere, covering nearly every surface. I was about to leave when I heard a noise from upstairs. It was faint, like a soft shuffle, but it was enough to make my heart race. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. There was no answer, but the shuffling sound grew louder, like someone, or something, was moving toward the top of the stairs. I froze, staring at the staircase. Then, in the dim light of my flashlight, I saw a shadowy figure standing at the top of the stairs. It was tall and hunched, its features obscured by the darkness. I didn't wait to see what it would do. I turned and ran, nearly tripping over the threshold as I bolted out of the house. I didn't tell anyone about what I had seen, but from that day on, I avoided the caretaker's house as much as possible. A few weeks later, I overheard some co-workers talking about the house. They said the previous groundskeeper had quit abruptly after claiming to see a man in the shadows inside. I finished the summer job without going near the caretaker's house again. But I still think about the figure at the top of the stairs. Whatever it was, I hope it stays in that house, and far away from me. It was a rainy night when my friends and I decided to explore an abandoned hospital on the outskirts of town. We had heard all the stories, how the hospital had shut down after a fire in the 1970s, how patients and staff had died in the blaze, and how some people claimed the building was haunted. We were skeptical, of course, but the thrill of exploring the crumbling ruins was too tempting to pass up. Armed with flashlights and our phones, we set out to see if the rumors were true. The hospital loomed large against the dark sky, its windows shattered and its walls covered in graffiti. The air was thick with the smell of damp concrete and decay. As we stepped inside, the sound of rain faded, replaced by the eerie silence of the abandoned building. The main hallway was lined with empty rooms, their doors hanging off their hinges. We moved cautiously, our footsteps echoing in the stillness. Every creak and groan of the building made us jump. In one of the rooms, we found old hospital beds, their mattresses stained and torn. Rusty medical equipment was scattered across the floor, and a broken wheelchair sat in the corner, its wheels askew. "Creepy," one of my friends muttered, shining his flashlight toward the wheelchair. We continued deeper into the building, eventually reaching the operating theater. The room was massive, with a rusted surgical table in the center and a shattered observation window above. It felt colder here, the air heavy with something I couldn't quite explain. Suddenly we heard it, a faint whisper like someone was speaking just out of earshot. We froze, exchanging nervous glances. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah," one of my friends replied, his face pale. It sounded like someone calling for help. We stood there, straining to hear. The whispering grew louder, more insistent, and it seemed to be coming from the hallway we had just come through. Against my better judgment, we decided to follow the sound. The hallway felt longer than before, the darkness pressing in around us. At the end of the hall, we found a door slightly ajar. I pushed it open, revealing a small room with shelves of dusty medical records. The whispering stopped the moment we stepped inside. On one of the shelves, we noticed a single file pulled halfway out. Curious, I opened it. Inside were yellowed pages detailing the treatment of a patient who had been admitted just days before the fire. The notes mentioned severe paranoia and claims of hearing voices. As I read, a loud bang echoed from somewhere deeper in the hospital. We dropped the file and ran, our flashlights bouncing wildly as we sprinted back toward the entrance. When we finally made it outside, gasping for breath, we agreed never to go back. To this day, I don't know if the whispers were real or just our imaginations running wild. But sometimes, late at night, I think about that file and the voices the patient claimed to hear. Maybe they never left. When I was 16, my family took a road trip across the country. We decided to stay at a small, family-run motel for the night after a long day of driving. The place was old and a little run down, but it was the only option for miles. The owner, a frail older woman, gave us 2 keys, one for my parents and one for my younger sister and me. Our room was at the far end of the building, and the hallway leading to it was dimly lit with flickering fluorescent lights. As soon as we entered the room, I felt uneasy. The air was stale, and there was a faint smell of mildew. The wallpaper was peeling, and the bedspread looked like it hadn't been replaced in decades. "It's just for one night," I told myself as I set my bag down and got ready for bed. My sister fell asleep quickly, but I stayed awake, scrolling through my phone. Around midnight, I heard a strange sound, like faint tapping, coming from the window. I turned off my phone and listened. The tapping continued, steady and rhythmic. Slowly, I turned toward the window, expecting to see a tree branch or maybe rain, but the sky was clear. My heart raced as I realized the tapping wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from inside the room. I sat frozen, staring at the window. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement near the closet. The door was slightly ajar, and it looked like something was shifting in the shadows. Trying not to panic, I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. I shone it toward the closet, but there was nothing there. Probably just my imagination, I whispered to myself, though I didn't believe it. I climbed back into bed, pulling the covers up to my chin, but the feeling of being watched didn't go away. At some point, I must have fallen asleep because I woke up suddenly to the sound of my sister screaming. "What's wrong?" I asked, fumbling for the lamp. She pointed to the closet, her face pale with terror. "There was someone in there." I turned on the light and ran to the closet, but it was empty. The door was wide open now, and the smell of mildew was stronger than ever. We spent the rest of the night in my parents' room, too scared to go back. In the morning, we told the motel owner what had happened. She looked at us with a strange expression and said, "You're not the first to say that." We left immediately, and I've never stayed in a roadside motel since. I didn't understand why my mom didn't see the flashlight when someone shone it at me. It's possible that she turned her back on something or thought I was joking. When I felt safe enough, I went back to the window and looked outside. There was nothing there. Whoever it was had disappeared. Then, the doorknob started to rattle as if someone was trying to turn it and get inside. My mom screamed, and we both grabbed a small kitchen knife. The rattling became more violent, and the door shook under the force of repeated kicks and pulls. Whoever it was, they were determined to break in. We were incredibly lucky because my dad arrived just in time. His boss had let him leave work early that night. When his car pulled into the driveway, the man trying to force his way in ran away into the darkness. My dad rushed us to the police station where we gave a statement about what happened. The police took it seriously, and a few weeks later they called us back to the station. They had caught the man trying to break into another house. When we arrived at the station, I knew it was him as soon as I saw him. The police told us that when they arrested him, he had rope, a knife, and handcuffs in his possession. Hearing that made my stomach churn. It was horrifying to think about what he might have planned. I'm just so thankful my dad arrived when he did. A few months later, we moved out of that cabin and into a new house. My dad and some of his friends built it themselves. I lived there for about 6 years until I moved out of town with my girlfriend. It happened when I was about 15 years old. My best friend Emma had invited me to stay over at her house for the weekend. Her family lived in an old farmhouse on the outskirts of town, surrounded by fields that seemed to stretch endlessly into the horizon. I always loved going to Emma's house. It was cozy and full of character, with creaky wooden floors and antique furniture. But there was one part of the house that always gave me the creeps: the attic. The attic door was located at the end of the upstairs hallway, and it was one of those pull-down types with a folding ladder. Emma told me her parents used it to store old family heirlooms, but she didn't like going up there. On the second night of my stay, we were in Emma's room, chatting and laughing about random things. It was late, probably close to midnight, when we both heard it. A soft scraping sound, like something being dragged across the floor. We froze, staring at each other. The sound was faint but unmistakable, and it seemed to be coming from the attic. Probably just mice, Emma said, though her voice lacked confidence. Trying to be brave, I suggested we go check it out. Emma hesitated, but eventually agreed. We grabbed a flashlight and crept down the hall to the attic door. The scraping noise continued, growing louder as we stood beneath the door. I pulled the cord to lower the ladder, and the hinges groaned loudly, making both of us jump. I climbed up first, with Emma close behind me, clutching my arm. The attic was dimly lit by the flashlight's beam, revealing stacks of old trunks, dusty furniture, and cobweb-covered boxes. The air smelled stale, and the floor creaked under our weight. At first, we didn't see anything unusual, but then Emma nudged me and pointed toward the far corner of the attic. There was a rocking chair, and it was moving, slowly, back and forth, as if someone had just been sitting in it. We stood there, frozen in place, as the chair continued to rock. I shone the flashlight around the attic, searching for any sign of what could have caused it. That's when we noticed the handprint. It was on the back of the rocking chair, a small, dusty handprint that looked too small to belong to an adult. "Let's go," Emma whispered, her voice trembling. We scrambled down the ladder and shut the attic door as fast as we could. Neither of us slept much that night, and Emma's parents didn't believe us when we told them about it in the morning. The next time I visited Emma's house, the attic door was nailed shut. She said her dad had sealed it up after hearing strange noises of his own. To this day, we don't know what or who was in the attic that night. When I was 17, I worked part-time at a small diner on the edge of our town. My shifts were usually in the evenings, which I didn't mind since the place was quiet after the dinner rush. I liked the solitude. It gave me time to think. One night I had the closing shift. It was just me and the cook, Tony, who was cleaning up in the kitchen. I was wiping down the counter when the bell above the front door jingled. I glanced up, surprised to see someone walk in so late. It was a man, tall and thin, wearing a long coat and a wide-brimmed hat that cast a shadow over his face. He moved slowly, his footsteps oddly quiet. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to sound cheerful. The man didn't respond. He walked to the farthest booth and sat down, his back to the door. I grabbed a menu and went over to him. As I placed the menu on the table, I noticed his hands. They were pale and bony, almost skeletal. "What can I get you?" I asked, my voice wavering slightly. He tilted his head slightly but still didn't speak. I felt a chill run down my spine. His silence was unnerving, and I couldn't see his face clearly under the shadow of his hat. "I'll give you a minute," I said, stepping back toward the counter. From the kitchen, Tony called out, "Everything okay out there?" "Yeah, just a late customer," I replied, though my unease was growing. When I turned back to the booth, the man was gone. The seat was empty and the menu was untouched. Confused, I walked over to the door. It was still locked and the bell hadn't rung again. "Tony?" I called, my voice shaking now. "Did you see that guy leave?" Tony came out of the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. "What guy?" "The man in the booth," I said, pointing. "He just disappeared." Tony frowned and walked over to the booth. "No one's here, kid. You're imagining things." But I wasn't imagining it. The chair where the man had been sitting was cold, as if someone, or something, had drained the warmth from it. I finished my shift as quickly as I could and left the diner without looking back. When I got home, I told my mom what had happened. She told me that years ago a man had died in that diner, a drifter who had come in late one night and suffered a heart attack in the same booth. I quit my job at the diner a week later. I still get chills whenever I think about that man and his hollow silence. I was about 12 years old when my family moved into a house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. It was a 2-story house with a spacious backyard and an unfinished basement that always felt colder than the rest of the house, no matter the season. From the first day, I felt uneasy in that basement. The air was heavy, and even though there were no windows, it always seemed like something was watching me when I went down there. My parents used it mostly for storage, so I avoided going down unless I absolutely had to. One evening, I was home alone while my parents went to visit some friends. I was sitting on the couch in the living room watching TV when I heard a loud thump coming from the basement. At first, I froze, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe something had fallen or shifted. But then I heard it again. This time, it sounded like footsteps. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen and tiptoed to the basement door. Slowly, I opened it and shone the light down the stairs. The beam illuminated boxes and furniture, but nothing seemed out of place. The footsteps had stopped. Just as I was about to close the door, I heard a faint whisper. It was so quiet that I couldn't make out the words, but it sent chills down my spine. I slammed the door shut and locked it, backing away quickly. When my parents got home later that night, I told them what had happened. My dad laughed and said it was probably the old furnace making noise, but my mom looked uneasy. She said the previous owner had mentioned something about the basement feeling off. Over the next few weeks, strange things kept happening. Objects would disappear and reappear in odd places. The sound of footsteps became more frequent, sometimes waking me up at night. My dog, who had always been calm, refused to go near the basement stairs and would growl at the door for no apparent reason. One night, I decided to stay up late and see if I could catch whatever was causing the noises. Around midnight, I heard the footsteps again. This time they were louder, and they seemed to be coming up the basement stairs. Terrified, I grabbed my flashlight and hid behind the couch. I watched the basement door, expecting it to open, but it stayed shut. The footsteps stopped just on the other side of the door. I don't know how long I sat there holding my breath, but eventually, I must have fallen asleep. When I woke up in the morning, the house was silent, and the basement door was slightly ajar. We moved out of that house a year later, and I've never been so relieved to leave a place behind. To this day, I still get nervous whenever I hear unexplained noises in a quiet house. When I was 20, I moved into a small studio apartment in a city far from home. It wasn't much, a single room with a tiny kitchenette and a bathroom, but it was all I could afford. The building itself was old, with peeling paint and a creaky elevator that rarely worked. The first few nights were uneventful. I spent my time unpacking and settling in, enjoying the independence of living on my own. But by the end of the first week, I started noticing small, strange things. It began with the mirror in the bathroom. Every morning when I went to brush my teeth, there would be faint smudges on the glass, like someone had run their fingers across it. I cleaned it repeatedly, but the smudges always returned. Then at night, I would hear soft noises, faint whispers, almost too quiet to make out. I convinced myself it was the neighbors through the thin walls, but the whispers always seemed to come from my closet. One night, as I lay in bed reading, I heard the unmistakable sound of the closet door creaking open. My heart raced as I turned to look. The door was ajar, though I was certain I had closed it earlier. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. There was no response, only silence. I got up and cautiously approached the closet, half expecting to find someone hiding inside. But it was empty. I shut the door firmly and propped a chair against it before going back to bed. That night, I barely slept. The next day, I mentioned the strange occurrences to my neighbor, an older woman who had lived in the building for years. Her face grew serious as I spoke. "You're in 3C, right?" she asked. I nodded. She hesitated before saying, "The last tenant in that apartment was a young woman. She disappeared about a year ago. No one knows what happened to her, but some people say she still lingers there." I laughed nervously, thinking she was trying to scare me, but her expression didn't change. That night, I decided to stay up late and keep the lights on, determined to prove to myself that there was nothing to fear. Around midnight, the whispers started again, louder this time. They were coming from the closet. I sat frozen on the bed, staring at the closet door. Slowly, the door began to creak open, even though the chair was still propped against it. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, shining it into the closet. For a moment, I thought I saw something. A shadowy figure, small and hunched, retreating deeper into the darkness. I didn't wait to find out what it was. I grabbed my keys and left the apartment, spending the night at a friend's place. The next day, I broke my lease and moved out. I never went back to that building, and I still don't know what I saw in the closet that night. But sometimes I wonder if the whispers were trying to warn me, or if they wanted something else entirely. One summer when I was about 14, my family rented a small cabin by a lake in Maine for a week-long vacation. It was secluded, surrounded by thick woods on one side and the still water of the lake on the other. I was excited to spend time fishing, swimming, and hiking with my siblings. The first few days were perfect. We explored the woods, roasted marshmallows by the fire, and spent hours by the water. But by the third night, I started noticing something odd. When the sun went down and the cabin got quiet, I could hear faint footsteps in the woods outside. At first, I brushed it off as animals moving through the trees, but the sound was too deliberate, like heavy boots crunching on fallen twigs and leaves. On the fourth night, my curiosity got the better of me. I decided to sit by the large living room window that faced the woods, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever was making the noise. I turned off all the lights inside so I wouldn't be seen and waited. For a long time, there was nothing. Then, just as I was about to give up, I saw movement. A tall figure stepped out from behind a tree and stood motionless, staring directly at the cabin. My heart raced. The figure didn't move closer. It just stood there. I couldn't make out its face or features in the dark, but its silhouette was unmistakable. It had broad shoulders and appeared to be wearing a long coat. I froze, unsure of what to do. After what felt like an eternity, the figure turned and walked back into the woods, disappearing among the trees. The next morning, I told my parents what I had seen, but they dismissed it as my imagination. My siblings teased me about being scared of the boogeyman. I tried to shake it off, but I couldn't ignore the uneasy feeling I had. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around midnight, I heard the footsteps again, louder this time. They were coming from the direction of the lake. I crept out of bed and peeked through the window. The figure was back, standing at the edge of the water, staring at the cabin. This time, it moved. Slowly, it began walking along the shoreline, its path leading closer to the cabin. Panicking, I woke my parents. My dad grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside, calling out into the night. The figure didn't respond, but the sound of its footsteps stopped abruptly. My dad shone the flashlight into the woods and along the lake, but there was no sign of anyone. We locked all the doors and windows that night. In the morning, we found footprints in the mud by the lake. They were large and deep, definitely not from any of us. The rest of the trip was tense. My parents didn't let us out of their sight, and we left a day earlier than planned. I'll never forget the way that figure stood so still, watching us. To this day, I wonder who or what it was. My parents raised me in Arizona. Our town was called Chandler. Oh, I love sports. It's great that school games for girls have gotten a lot better over the years. I used to play volleyball a lot, but lately I've also been playing soccer. That made my dad happy, maybe because he always hoped I'd like sports as much as he does. I was not very effeminate, though. I was more of a tomboy. When I started playing soccer, my dad started to cheer me on and we became closer. I still liked shopping for clothes with my mom, though. As I got older, we had days when we got pampered together. On the whole, our family got along great. My mom owned her own real estate company that worked in most of Arizona. Dad worked as an accountant for a big company in town. 2 days a week, he did his job from home. Plus, Dad had been wanting us to move out of state for more than a year. I told them I didn't mind moving when they asked. I wasn't very close to my friends because I only had a few of them. I thought it might be fun for all of us to make the change. At that point, I was 18 years old and still didn't know what I wanted to do for work. Moving to a different state might give me new chances. I also broke up with my boyfriend last month, which is really new. We didn't cheat on each other, but we no longer felt the same way. We broke up but stayed friends. As a joke, I said, "Who knows, maybe I'll meet new people, make new friends, or even find a new boyfriend in the new place." After going on about moving for a few months, Dad said, "I've been checking." I liked that it looked like they were moving toward San Diego. 2 weeks after we talked, Mom and Dad went on a long weekend trip. That's when I realized it would be my first time at home by myself. After they left, I went into town to buy clothes. After that, I got back around 3:30 p.m. Since I ate in town, I put my new clothes away and chose to swim. There was a small pool in our backyard. I was floating in the pool and taking it easy when I heard my cell phone ring on the deck. Dad was talking on the phone. He called to make me remember something. He told me, "It's Halloween on October 31st. He made me think of how, when I was younger, we would dress up and hit every house in the neighborhood for candy. I remembered, but I told him I hadn't done that since I was about 15 years old. It's true. We've been taking care of all the trick-or-treaters who come to the door since then. Most of the time we give them sweets or candy. You'll have to answer the door tonight when the kids come over in groups since you're home and we're not. You'll need to give them something like candy and sweets. Mom wants me to let you know that there are some things in the cabinet above the fridge. Dad also said, have a nice evening and don't forget to put the battery pumpkin from the garage by the front door. Don't forget to turn it on, okay? Don't worry, Dad. I made a joke that I would take care of all the zombies and werewolves tonight. After that, I chose to shower and get ready. After taking a shower, I went to my closet and found my old horror makeup kit. I put white paint on my face and drew a skull on it. I wore a black shirt and black pants. After that, I heated up a pizza because I was hungry before the trick-or-treaters came. Then I remembered that Dad told me to put out the battery pumpkin. My dad used to put it by the front door next to the palm tree. I remember that its eyes were sparkling. I looked for it in the garage. I looked for it for about 10 minutes before I found it on top of the shelves. I couldn't reach it, so I put a wooden box next to the shelves. After that, I got on the box. I still couldn't get to it. That's why I stood on my toes and leaned forward. I finally got it. Unfortunately, I don't remember how I lost my balance, but I do remember that I hit my head as I fell. It all turned black. I was on the floor when I woke up. I felt really stupid. I got up, but I was feeling a little dizzy and lost. I held onto the shelves for support. It scared me that I had been on the floor for 30 minutes when I checked my watch. I heard the front doorbell ring and kids yelling as they went trick-or-treating out of the blue. The side door led me from the garage to the kitchen, but first I went to the door and got some candy. There were 4 kids inside, all about 10 years old when I opened it. 3 boys with gray face paint, red eyes, and torn shirts were dressed as zombies. A girl dressed as a vampire with cool makeup and white fangs was also there. "If you look at my face," one of the boys said, "I like your fake blood skeleton look." What did I say? I realized all of a sudden that my fingers were red with blood. I've never put blood on my face. I didn't try to explain. I put their small bag of candy into 3 of their cases instead. They told me thanks, wished me a fun Halloween, and then they left. I shut the door and set the other candy bags on the table by the front door for the next group. I sat down in the living room because my head hurt still. I shut my eyes for a short time. I woke up again when there was a loud knock on the front door. It was 8:30 p.m. I think I fell asleep for an hour. I thought, why don't people knock if there's a bell button? 3 loud knocks came again. I started to feel scared as I walked toward the door. As I got closer, I could feel a very cold draft coming from under the door. It made my spine tingle. There were goosebumps on the back of my neck. I stopped by the door just as the 3rd loud knock came. They could be heard in the hall. I walked up to the window and peeped through it. I only saw a tall person in black with a black hood over its head. I couldn't make out the face. That kid looks really big to me. It looked more like an adult trying to scare people. This time, I chose not to answer the door. Things got strange when I tried to leave, though. I opened the door with my right hand after taking it off the lock, as if it could think for itself and I couldn't stop it. A tall person in a long black robe with a big hood stood there when the door opened. There was also a strange, unpleasant smell. I tried to talk, but all that came out was a whisper. I suddenly became very aware of my body and felt like I was in a bad dream and couldn't change anything. A part of me knew that none of this was true. I remember falling back all of a sudden. After that, it got dark. When I woke up, I was on the couch. I don't know how long I was out. My parents were standing over me. My mom put an ice pack on my head and wrapped the cut in a bandage. It turned out that I hadn't cleaned it well enough. I also got a bad headache. They took me to the hospital right away for scans. I'm glad I didn't hurt myself when I fell. I was very scared because I thought I was stuck in a bad dream that I couldn't escape. It all felt so real. Even more so since I was by myself at home. It's okay if some people don't believe what I'm about to say, but give it a chance before you decide not to. It took place while I was staying at a friend's house in New Zealand. We used to be very close, but since we switched schools, we're not as close. We were both about 11 or 12 years old at the time. We were great friends and loved spending time with each other. Then, one weekend, we chose to sleep over at her house. Her house had only 1 floor and a big room that was the living room, dining room, and kitchen. The bedrooms were in a different part of the house. The party was at my friend's house, so I got my things together and went there. As I live in the southern hemisphere, I think it was late November or early December. Don't mix up the seasons then. My friend and I took a nice walk to the beach before the sun went down. It wasn't too far from our school. As we walked along a narrow road with bushes, I got the feeling that someone was following us. When I told my friend, she said it was all in my head and didn't pay any attention. We had dinner with her family when we got back to her house. It was a little strange at first, but then we all started having fun. We got blankets and planned to sleep in the living room fort that we had made. The sun had already set and it was about 9 o'clock at this point. Their younger daughter slept with them, so the rest of my friend's family had already gone to bed. When the fort was done, we were very pleased with how it looked. We were happy with the fort even though our feet stuck out from the end. For the next 5 hours I don't remember much, but I do remember that her parents had to tell us to be quiet a few times. I often stayed up late, so I was very happy. Things got worse after that. Something caught my attention as we talked about the fort we built. It looked like a big, strong person was standing imposingly by the window. We could see outside because my friend didn't have any blinds on her windows, but it wasn't very clear because the streetlight was a little far from her house. She lived on a dead-end street. There was no way for us to see the road or the other houses because of the full moon. Its light was shining through the window slightly above the homes. We both moved closer to the thing and stared up at it because we were both interested as kids. The tallest part was about 7 feet, just a few inches below the top of the window frame. It was big and strong, and its nose looked like a wolf's. Its ears were pointed up like a very muscular man's, but its whole body was covered in thick fur. The fur glowed or reflected a reddish color, but the moonlight reflecting off the glass made it shine white. Its face looked like it was snarling, or maybe it was just showing its teeth. Its teeth were very white with a bit of a sparkle from the moonlight, and they were sharp like a dog's teeth. The moon was shining beautifully and brightly. We were both afraid to turn on the lights. Then I remembered that I had to go to the kitchen to see what time it was. I had to turn on a dim light because it was too dark to see. A bright orange light came from it. My friend came with me and ran with me. After that, we both ran back quickly. If we turned on the light in the living room, it would make it harder to see outside, so we did not. It seemed like the soft, warm light from the kitchen was shining on the thing, just enough for it to see us. My friend and I both watched as it turned its head toward me. When my friend freaked out, I felt scared all of a sudden, like I should have all along. Moving away from the window and toward my friend, I ran toward the couch or the TV. Both of us agreed that we should go back to the fort and sleep. Early in the morning, my friend and I tried not to make too much noise as we talked about what had happened. We got up to take another look out the window when the sun came in. What it was gone, and there was no sign that something so big had been there. No one else knew what we had seen that night, so we didn't talk about it. And the sound was a little strange. My grandma knows a lot about these kinds of things, so I didn't even tell her. I often think about what that thing might have been. A transformation, a werewolf, or even a skinwalker are the only ones that come to mind. I really don't know, though. I'm still shocked and confused. One of the strangest and scary nights I've ever had. I helped my friend John move not long ago. It wasn't easy because there were only 2 of us doing the hard work. Moving boxes and furniture took hours. It was getting dark and we were both tired by the time we were almost done. John did have an extra bed in the basement though, which was nice. It was okay with him for me to stay the night. We could finish up in the morning. I agreed to drive back to my place because I was too tired to do anything else. We also still had some things to move. He slept well in the bed he had in the basement. I was about to fall asleep when I heard some strange sounds. The sounds in the basement made it sound like something was moving, but I couldn't spot where they were coming from. I tried not to think about how strange it was. I thought the sounds might have been mice or something, which was pretty gross, but I was so worn out that I finally fell asleep. I got up the next morning and went upstairs. John asked me how my night in the basement went. I told him it was fine, but I did note the strange sounds I heard. He looked shocked and told me that he had also heard noises like those coming from the basement, but he thought I was the only one making them. Then he said he heard strange sounds coming from another part of the house. We were both a little scared, but we thought it must be a mouse or something. We made the choice to keep moving John's things. As I was bringing the last few boxes to the basement, I dropped one of them and it fell to the floor. I saw something strange when I bent down to pick up the box. At one point, a small handle stuck out of the floor in the basement area. It was kind of hidden under the stairs. It was hard to see. You'd have to look very closely to notice it. John came over to look at it after I called him. One more look and then a light pull on the handle. To our surprise, it lifted, showing a room we hadn't seen. We saw a camping bag and a few empty water bottles inside, even though it was small. That was the only person who should have been in that secret room at that time. John and I figured out that the weird noises were probably coming from the person who had been living there without us knowing. It scared us. We looked through the whole house but couldn't find anything. Our friends heard about the secret room and how someone had been living there, but that person never came back. I couldn't wait to spend the weekend at our field house with my school's football team, but something didn't feel right when we got there that night. As soon as I walked inside, I couldn't get rid of this bad feeling. I didn't know who was watching me, but I felt like someone was. Since I couldn't change the situation, I prepared my sleeping bag and went outside to hang out with my friends. We played games in the computer room until we were worn out. We saw strange things in the small room next to ours while we were playing, though. In case the other guys were pulling a joke on us, I went to the room. Something old and statue-like moved on its own. It looked at me with its eyes open. I jumped back and quickly turned away because I was scared. I had something to say, but I kept quiet around my friends. I was afraid they would make fun of me because they thought I was crazy. So I didn't say anything. We all went to bed afterward. I wasn't too tired, so I talked with the other guys for a while. We stopped talking and went to sleep in the end. When I woke up around midnight, my stomach felt a little off, so I opened a window to let some fresh air in. I felt worse when I looked outside, though. A strange man stood in the middle of the football field and stared at us. I tried to calm down because I thought I was making things up. The man then moved. One of my friends was also looking out at the field with a scared look on their face. It made me feel better to know I wasn't the only one who saw him. At night, though, I couldn't sleep because I could hear a strange voice outside my window. I couldn't sleep because I was too scared to close my eyes. I went outside with the guys the next morning to play football. I asked one of them about last night while we were playing to see if he saw the same thing I did. It was weird that he saw and heard the same creepy things I did. He told us that he wanted to talk about it but was afraid that we wouldn't believe him and would make fun of him. We found out later that there was a cemetery close, and I think it might have something to do with it. I might be wrong, but I can't think of any other reason. Story 8. This took place in Colorado in the winter of the late 1990s when I was a youth. We lived in a house in the middle of the woods with my family. The closest shop and house were at least 30 minutes drive from our cabin. I think it was 10:30 at night. My mom and I were the only ones there because my dad worked late. As dinner was ending, my mom asked me to do the dishes, which I did. I saw the outside light go out while I was waiting for the cold water to warm up, but I could make out what looked like a face. It was outside, staring at me. To see better, I used a cloth to wipe the fog off the window. I was hit by a very bright light. My eyes hurt from the brightness, so I had to squint and look away for a moment. After seeing my mom finish putting the last of the dishes in the sink, I realized what was going on. My mom asked me what was wrong after I moved away from the window. I told her what had been going on, that someone outside was looking at me and shining a flashlight through our window. She didn't seem to believe me at first, but I kept telling her I was serious. She finally decided to take a look. As soon as she got to the window, the light flashed again, this time blinding her as well. My mom backed away, clearly alarmed, and told me to go to my room and lock the door. I did as I was told, but I could hear her frantically making calls to my dad and possibly the police. From my room, I peeked through the blinds. I could still see the faint beam of a flashlight moving in the woods just outside our property. After what felt like an eternity, the flashlight disappeared. A short while later, I heard my dad's truck pull into the driveway. He burst through the door, asking my mom what had happened. My mom explained everything, and they both went outside to check. The next morning, I woke up to find my dad boarding up the windows. He said there were footprints all around the house, some of which led to the back door. He assured me it was probably just someone lost in the woods, but his voice betrayed his concern. We never saw the flashlight again, but I'll never forget the fear I felt that night. I hung out with my friend Robert and slept over at his house when I was about 10 years old. Robert and I got along great. We spent a lot of time together. He would stay at my place sometimes, and I would stay at his. Sometimes Robert's dad would come with us to the garden to practice football, throwing or pitching. But this time, he was on a business trip. So, as we often did, we chose to play video games instead. It was time to go to bed when Robert's mom came up to his room. We were having a great time. We both got ready for bed. Robert got into bed, and I laid down in my sleeping bag on the floor. I quickly fell asleep, but when I woke up later, I felt a little sleepy. As my eyes got used to the dark, I saw a shadowy person standing in the hallway outside of Robert's room. I went back to sleep because I thought it was Robert's dad. We had cereal for breakfast the next morning. Robert said today his dad would be home. I remembered the man I saw last night in the hallway all of a sudden. I knew it wasn't Robert's dad because he was not in the country. It felt like a dream at first, but I knew it was real. Robert was really shocked when I told him what I had seen. Though I wasn't sure if Robert really believed me, just to be safe, we began to look around the house for any open windows or doors. We finally got to the basement where they had an extra room. It was a mess inside when we opened the door, but nobody was there. Robert was shocked because the last time he saw it, it was clean. He said that room wasn't used very often and that the door was usually shut. Robert got scared all of a sudden and ran upstairs to tell his mom. After going downstairs, she quickly came back up and said she was calling the cops. When the cops finally got there, they looked around the house. The man was not found, but they did notice that the guest bedroom window that leads to the basement was open. It looked like the man had been living in the guest room for a few days. We don't know if he had already left or if he heard us talking and ran away. The whole day was spent at a soccer game. My little brother was on a team and they took me with them. I was 16 years old and living in the northeast of Great Britain at the time. It rained so hard that it felt like buckets of water were falling on me as I stood at the edge of the field and thought about what was going on in my life. When I was 16, I began to really think about things. I didn't really want to help my brother. It made me feel bad to say it, but I barely cared about football. Not at all. When we got home that night, my brother smelled like mud and wet dog. He thought it was funny to put his dirty shorts on top of my clean pants. Then, when we got home, my parents told me they were going out that night, and my brother had planned to sleep over at a friend's house. He and his friend played on the same team and were about the same age. They were best friends and slept over together almost every weekend. My dad then looked at me and said, "Well, unless you want to come with us." I didn't mind at that time. I considered going with my parents, but then I felt like I wouldn't really fit there, like I was just going on their date. I was scared to stay home by myself, though. Our house is on the edge of town. Our aunt and uncle lived about a mile away. They lived another mile in the same direction. My grandfather died when I was 8, so it was now just Grandma and Grandfather. She was 84 years old and lived alone, but we take care of her. Most nights, my mom and I would drive there to cook her food and make sure she was okay. I remember it was a Friday night and we were fresh off a football game. I was glad to be at home. I wondered why my parents let me stay home by myself as I went upstairs to take a shower. I saw I was already by myself at home when I got out of the shower. Parents didn't even say goodbye. They left without telling me because they were in a hurry to drop off my brother. But to be honest, it felt a little off. There is noise in the house all the time. Sometimes my younger brother is really a pain to be around. You would know if he was in the same building, trust me, all the time, even while he sleeps. He snores so loud it sounds like a truck on the highway. After getting wet, I dried off and changed into my jammies for the night. It was probably between 6 and 7 p.m., but it was winter, so it was already dark. There was still heavy rain outside. I went downstairs to get food after drying my hair. Even though I wasn't very good at cooking, my mom still made dinner for me when I was 16 to 17. I didn't start cooking my own food until I was 18 years old and went to college. I made something out of thin air when I went downstairs. But I'm not sure what it was. It could have been a sandwich and chips, baked beans and eggs, or something else. I watched TV and did nothing else for the rest of the night. I thought they'd be home by at least 11 p.m., but neither Mom nor Dad had said when they'd be back. Just think about it. What places are open past midnight? Also, my parents don't like going to clubs. They are now in their 40s. When I was done with my homemade dinner, I threw all of my plates, bowls, and utensils in the sink and turned on the water and soap. After letting it sit for a while, I went to watch TV and relax on the couch. I had been lying there for 20 minutes, putting off doing the dishes, when all of a sudden, the phone next to me rang. I'm not making this up. No one ever called our home phone. They didn't have many friends, and all of my friends and my brother's friends called our cell phones. That means the home phone wasn't very useful. For our family, it was a big deal when it rang. I didn't know who could be calling at this point, which was around 8 p.m. When the first call came in, I didn't answer it. It went straight to voicemail, and if we didn't answer, you could hear the message they left. I could only hear breathing on the other end. I tell you, it was really creepy. I was scared even though I knew my house was safe. The person breathed for a while, and then the call stopped. After that, the phone rang again after only 1 minute. I didn't answer, but I heard the same heavy breathing but no words. He or she breathed with grunts and groans. After the second call was over, the home phone finally went back to normal. Then all of a sudden, my phone in my pajamas started to vibrate. I took it out and saw that my mom was calling. When I picked up the phone, my mom sounded very tense and scared. "Go to your grandmother's right now, Layla. A police car is on its way." It broke my heart. I hung up the phone, put on my shoes, and ran out the door. I ran there in 20 to 15 minutes, I think. I was very tired. There was an ambulance outside when I got there. She was found on the kitchen floor after having a stroke. Even though she couldn't move, she crawled up to the kitchen to get the phone. I was having a fear attack at that very moment. She made it through in the end. Of course, I didn't pick up the phone because the whole thing was so scary and upsetting. There was a boy at school named David who invited me to sleep over at his house one weekend. I didn't expect the invitation because we didn't know each other very well. We weren't exactly friends, just casual acquaintances who had talked a few times. David had only started at our school the year before, and we hadn't spent much time together. At first, I wasn't sure about going, but David kept insisting until I agreed. When I got home from school, I asked my mom if it was okay. She said yes and drove me to his house after school. It was my first time at David's house, and I was still surprised he invited me. He was nice enough and gave me a tour of the house, which was pretty big. His room was filled with action figures and comic books, which I thought were interesting. But there was something about David that felt off. The way he talked and moved was strange. Awkward, almost. We spent the evening playing video games, mostly Mario Kart and Super Smash Bros. While it was fun, I couldn't shake the weird vibe I felt around him. When it was time for bed, I laid down in my sleeping bag on the floor of his room. His room was spacious for a kid, and the floor was cluttered with toys and clothes. I didn't fall asleep right away, but eventually dozed off. A few hours later, I woke up feeling uncomfortably hot. I noticed an extra blanket draped over my head, and my sleeping bag was fully zipped up, even though I hadn't zipped it earlier. I took the blanket off and unzipped the bag to cool down. Then I glanced over at David, who was awake and staring at me. "Did you put this blanket on me?" I asked. David shook his head. "No." I wasn't sure if I believed him. "Are you lying?" His face turned red and his voice rose. "I said I didn't do it." His sudden anger startled me. I didn't want to escalate things, so I muttered, "Okay," and turned over to try to sleep. It took a while, but eventually, I drifted off again. When I woke up in the morning, David wasn't in the room. I figured he had gone to the bathroom or something, so I waited. After a while, I needed to use the bathroom too. I tried to leave the room, but the door wouldn't open. It was locked from the outside. Frustrated, I called out David's name and knocked on the door. There was no response. I yelled louder, ringing the doorbell hanging on the wall, but still no answer. After what felt like forever, David's mom opened the door, looking surprised to see me inside. She told me my mom had arrived to pick me up. I quickly grabbed my things and left without seeing David again. The whole experience left me feeling uneasy, and I spent the rest of the day at home playing video games to distract myself. That evening, while I was in my room, my mom called out to say one of my friends was at the door. Confused, I went to the door and saw David standing there. He looked tense, almost angry. "Why did you leave so early without saying goodbye?" he demanded. "You locked me in your room," I said. "I had no idea where you were." David's expression darkened. "That's not true. You're a liar and a bad friend." I didn't want to argue, so I told him I didn't care and went back inside. 15 minutes later, I heard a loud crash. My heart raced as I turned toward the window, which was now shattered. Glass was everywhere, and my parents came running into my room. We looked outside and saw David running down the street. My parents called his family and demanded an explanation. After a heated conversation, David stopped coming to school, and I never saw him again. Most of the time, I'm the only one who has a set pattern when I get home from work because my family is busy with work or school. This means that I'm often the only person in the house for a long time. My mom and dad were both working that night, and my sister was at her boyfriend's house. For fun, I was sitting on the couch in the living room downstairs and playing an unknown phone game until everyone else got home. Our cat was sound asleep in another room and the AC quit making noise. I heard something moving near our front door all of a sudden. I didn't think much of it at first because the kids next door often play too close to our yard and throw things on it. There was a window that faced the direction of the noise, but the curtains are always drawn over it. The curtains are hard to move anyway because there is a big box right in front of the window that blocks most of the view. So I just thought it was the usual noise from our neighbors. I changed my mind because the noise didn't go away. If it had been one of those kids, they would have quickly grabbed their ball and run back to their side of the road and into their own yard. It dawned on me that it was almost 9 p.m., which meant that those kids would have been in bed by now. As soon as I had these thoughts and saw these things, something else happened. It started to move again, going around the house and toward the wall I was leaning against. Then I saw that it was taking big steps, which meant it had to be tall, and I heard its loud footsteps on our driveway's dirt. At that point, I was sure it wasn't one of the kids from next door. I began to believe that it might be my parents coming home and needing me to open the front door for them. After that, I saw a head through the window above me. Our house is on a slightly higher piece of land, so I have to stand on a small patch of grass and hold on to the corner of the side of the house to stay balanced in order to get to that window above me. But I didn't hear anyone step on the small patch of dirt or the house squeak from someone holding onto the corner. That means they were still standing on the gravel driveway to look through the window above me. From that distance, I could only see their face, so they must be about 7 feet tall. It became clear that it wasn't someone I knew, which made me very scared. My heart began to beat fast. To hide as much as possible, I pushed harder against the couch. I hoped it would work because it looked like it did. I could only see a dark brow, and the person didn't seem to notice me. I couldn't see any hair or tell what color it was. To be honest, I couldn't see any hair. It began to walk along the house toward our back door after what seemed like a long time but was probably only 10 to 15 seconds. I knew that thing could see me through our big window if it got to the back door. I quickly left the living room and went into the kitchen. It made me feel safer inside. It wouldn't help if it knew where to look for a window on the porch. It would still have to look through the screens that cover that side of the porch. It went by a big porch swing. I waited outside the downstairs bathroom, which is between the kitchen and the living room. The blinds were thin and a little see-through. I heard steps going onto the back porch and stopping for a moment while I was waiting. I tried very hard to be still and quiet. This person or thing walked back and forth on the back porch. They even tried to open the door to the laundry room, which I heard. We keep that door locked, though, because we don't use it very often. I became even more scared when I thought I heard it no longer, like it had left the porch and was back on the grass. When I wasn't near a wall, I could hear it walking. I knew it could look at me at any time through any of the many other windows. I quickly went up the stairs and waited outside my sister's room because the stairs to the second floor were right next to me. Once more, it had been a while since I heard anything. I carefully moved to the window next to me and made sure the blinds were all the way down. I then took a quick peek outside. At that very moment, I felt a chill run down my spine because that thing was standing almost below me, holding our basement door wide open. I looked straight ahead at the wall and couldn't see any clothes on it. It also had a strange shape. It seemed big, but I could see bones sticking out from under its skin. When it reached for the basement door again, it looked like it had no hair at all, and I was sure it hadn't seen me. I crept down the hall to my parents' room in the dark. After about 20 minutes, my mom came home. I didn't tell her or anyone else in my family what happened, and I never saw that thing again. It's a good thing I didn't get a good look at it. No matter who or what it was, I hope it stays away from me. It should make you feel safe to be at home. But I didn't feel safe that night. I live in a small town where everyone seems to know each other and for the most part gets along fine. On a map, our town is just a tiny dot, and outsiders rarely notice us. For the longest time, I thought living here was safe and uneventful. But that all changed one summer. The day was sweltering, so hot that even breathing felt like an effort. My best friend had come over to my house and we decided she would stay for a sleepover. Later, we packed our bags and planned to walk to her house. As we were leaving, we heard the familiar jingle of the ice cream truck. It was a big white truck, always a hit with the kids in our neighborhood. The sound brought kids running, coins jingling in their hands. We decided to grab some ice cream before heading out, but when I reached the window to place our order, I froze. The man behind the counter wasn't the usual friendly ice cream vendor. He was a stranger. "Where's the usual guy?" I asked, trying to sound casual. The man smiled, a thin, unsettling grin. "He's on vacation," he said. His teeth were yellowed and his voice had a strange edge to it. Something about him made my stomach turn. His dirty white tank top and scruffy appearance didn't help either. My friend and I quickly decided not to buy anything and walked away. "That guy was weird," I whispered. As we walked, the jingle from the truck followed us, growing faint as we moved further away. We tried to forget about it and talked about random things, but not long after, the music started up again, closer this time. Turning around, we saw the ice cream truck slowly driving past us, the man staring down at us from the driver's seat. We quickened our pace, taking a right turn to a quieter road. For a moment, we thought we'd lost him, but then we heard the music again. This time it was louder and the truck was speeding toward us. Panic set in. We ducked into a nearby park, hoping to lose him among the trees and playground equipment. A mutual friend happened to be there and we told her about the creepy man. She decided to walk with us for safety. Together we made it to my friend's house. As we said goodbye to our mutual friend and stepped inside, we felt a brief sense of relief. Her mom wasn't home, but there was a note on the door. "Gone to the store, back soon." We didn't think much of it until we heard the ice cream truck music again. It stopped right outside the house. Through the window, we saw the man get out of the truck, his expression angry and determined. He knocked on the door, waited a moment, and then tried to open it. Finding it locked, he began kicking the door and yelling, "I know you're in there." Terrified, we hid under the back porch. Through the slats, I could see him go around the house, still yelling. When he reached the back door, he produced a shotgun and fired it at the lock. The door burst open, and he stepped inside. We didn't wait to see what would happen next. We bolted down the street to a neighbor's house and banged on the door until they let us in. Breathless, we explained what had happened, and they immediately called the police. An hour later, the police returned to tell us the man was gone. They had found the shotgun in the house, but no sign of him or his truck. To this day, they never caught him, and the truck was never seen again. I still can't hear an ice cream truck jingle without feeling my heart race. One summer when I was about 14, my family rented a small cabin by a lake in Maine for a week-long vacation. It was secluded, surrounded by thick woods on one side and the still water of the lake on the other. I was excited to spend time fishing, swimming, and hiking with my siblings. The first few days were perfect. We explored the woods, roasted marshmallows by the fire, and spent hours by the water. But by the third night, I started noticing something odd. When the sun went down and the cabin got quiet, I could hear faint footsteps in the woods outside. At first, I brushed it off as animals moving through the trees, but the sound was too deliberate, like heavy boots crunching on fallen twigs and leaves. On the fourth night, my curiosity got the better of me. I decided to sit by the large living room window that faced the woods, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever was making the noise. I turned off all the lights inside so I wouldn't be seen and waited. For a long time, there was nothing. Then, just as I was about to give up, I saw movement. A tall figure stepped out from behind a tree and stood motionless, staring directly at the cabin. My heart raced. The figure didn't move closer. It just stood there. I couldn't make out its face or features in the dark, but its silhouette was unmistakable. It had broad shoulders and appeared to be wearing a long coat. I froze, unsure of what to do. After what felt like an eternity, the figure turned and walked back into the woods, disappearing among the trees. The next morning, I told my parents what I had seen, but they dismissed it as my imagination. My siblings teased me about being scared of the boogeyman. I tried to shake it off, but I couldn't ignore the uneasy feeling I had. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around midnight, I heard the footsteps again, louder this time. They were coming from the direction of the lake. I crept out of bed and peeked through the window. The figure was back, standing at the edge of the water, staring at the cabin. This time, it moved. Slowly, it began walking along the shoreline, its path leading closer to the cabin. Panicking, I woke my parents. My dad grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside, calling out into the night. The figure didn't respond, but the sound of its footsteps stopped abruptly. My dad shone the flashlight into the woods and along the lake, but there was no sign of anyone. We locked all the doors and windows that night. In the morning, we found footprints in the mud by the lake. They were large and deep, definitely not from any of us. The rest of the trip was tense. My parents didn't let us out of their sight, and we left a day earlier than planned. I'll never forget the way that figure stood so still watching us. To this day, I wonder who or what it was.